So, good morning, everybody. Welcome to the CPHMS webinar on tissue engineering and how to use them in MPS models. So, this is the 8th webinar in the series. And just before we begin, just a few ground rules. So, ensure that at all times the audio is off, the video can be on based on your convenience. And if there are any other questions for the speakers during the presentation, we request you to write them down in the chat box. And after the presentations, we can take them to the speakers and uh, get the replies. And if there's anything else which you want to share or let us know, then through the chat box, please let us know. But one thing is that please ensure that your audios are off all the time. So having said that, I would like to introduce Dr. Surat Parvatam. She is the Senior Research Associate at the Center for Predictive Human Model Systems. So I would request her to talk for a few minutes about the center and the kind of activities which we carry out here. Followed by which we will have the presentations by both Dr. Ghosh and Dr. Chatterjee. So having said that, I again welcome you all to the webinar, and Dr. Surat, over to you.
Thanks, Shyam, and thanks everyone for joining us for this webinar. So I'll just take like a few minutes of your time just to give you briefly tell about what our center is and why we are conducting these monthly webinars. Is my screen visible, Shyam? Shyam, is the screen visible?
Yes. Yeah.
Yes,
okay. Go ahead. Yeah.
Okay, so we are the Center for Predictive Human Model Systems, which was established at Atal Incubation Center CCMB in collaboration with Humane Society International India. And this center was started in 2018, basically as a policy and a think tank to enable more biomedical research that is relevant to humans. Because like many of you might be from biology background, and as we all know that biological research depends a lot on using animal models. And while animal models have given us extremely useful insights over the past several decades, it's also increasingly emerging that many of them cannot capture all the complexities of human biology. And in the past decade, we've had several advances in tissue engineering, bioinformatics, and omics area. And now we can begin to explore model systems that are based more on human cells and human biology, which makes, the idea of the center was how we can enable more of this research, which is more relevant to human biology in India. And to do this, we carry out several types of activities. So one of our activities is we have written several white papers over past 1.5 years in each of these areas. For example, where we have written one on microphysiological systems, pathway-based research, and then also systems and computational biology to understand what are the challenges in conducting this kind of research in India and what is the status of funding, research, infrastructure, etc. And another aspect is we also realize that one of the major challenges is the awareness about these methodologies. And to do this, for the past 8 months, we've been conducting monthly webinar series where we have several Indian researchers come and talk about what research they're conducting using these model systems. We also give out grants in these areas. For example, we recently gave out a grant to 2 Indian scientists to develop an adverse outcome pathway in the field of cancer. And again, we also develop reviews and several articles, again, to increase more knowledge base in this area. So just with that brief, I would end, and I would ask Shyam to introduce our speakers. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Surat, for the presentation. So now I would just give a brief introduction about Dr. Saurabh Ghosh. So Dr. Saurabh Ghosh is a faculty at IIT Delhi, and his lab is the Regenerative Engineering Laboratory, Medical Textiles and Tissue Engineering. So his lab focuses on combining the principles of textile technology and tissue engineering to develop novel engineering solutions for complex clinical diseases, to gain better qualitative and quantitative understanding of the tissue microenvironmental conditions fundamental for tissue development and pathogenesis. So to give a brief sketch about Dr. Ghosh, he has finished his BTech from Indian Institute of Jute Technology, followed by an MTech from IIT Delhi and PhD from University of Basel, Switzerland, and followed by postdoctoral training at Tufts University, Boston, and then has joined IIT Delhi. Having said this, I would now request Dr. Saurabh Ghosh to start his presentation, and also, if possible, can also talk about how textile engineering and tissue engineering. So that outplay, if you can just talk about it, then that would be a great start. Over to you, Dr. Ghosh.
Yeah, just a brief for all the participants, like whatever questions you may have, you can please write it down in the chat box and we can take it at the end of the session. Please don't unmute your mic. So just a small request. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Shyam, for your kind introduction, and thanks a lot for inviting me to share our findings. So I'm sure all of you are aware of this general cycle of tissue engineering. The ability to bioengineer functional tissue analogs offers great promise for organ transplantation. So if somebody is suffering from injury or certain disease or congenital defects, tissue engineers try to isolate cells from a biopsy, and then we try to culture those cells in petri dish. And when we have enough number of cells, we culture those cells on 3D porous scaffold materials. Then we keep it in bioreactor for certain time. And when the tissue construct is matured enough, it can be implanted back in the area of defect in patient's body. But even after 40 years, now we are realizing that we could get only very handful tissue engineer product which could reach human clinical trial level, and those constructs also got very moderate success. So starting from the beginning, there was a remarkable hype and expectation from the media, even to the public, about tissue engineering research. So now it is right time for us to reevaluate whether this tissue engineering strategy is going in proper direction or what will be our future path. Just for example, I would like to present the story of cartilage tissue engineering, because this tissue engineering field started with cartilage tissue engineering. People thought that this is the simplest target to engineer because it is made up of only chondrocytes. There is no blood vessel, no nerve. And I classified all the publications from Scopus in different time period. People have used all sorts of natural polymer, silk, alginate, chitosan, as well as various type of synthetic polymers. And every year we are having more and more number of papers published. But even after 50, 60 years, now we still do not have any clinically relevant, functionally equivalent engineered cartilage tissue, which can withstand the load of human body. So now we need to reevaluate our strategies where we are doing mistake, and from that we need to learn something to decide our future path. So I am sure, sorry, this slide is very complicated and too crowded, but this is probably one of the most important slide of this talk. Why tissue engineering is not getting its desirable success. Now we are realizing that merely culturing cells on scaffold biomaterials in presence of various bioactive factors, soluble growth factors, is a very naive and inadequate approach to recapitulate very complicated anatomical geometry. So many of the tissue engineering studies generated very poor reproducibility because of either donor to donor variation or uncontrolled differentiation of cells into phenotypically unstable population. So we need to develop better understanding about genes, proteins, cellular signaling pathways, also about the developmental biology, how organ develops inside human body, inside a small embryo, and how its function can be regulated. So to develop that understanding, probably biomaterials will play a very important role, where we can try to control the chemistry, morphology, manufacturing techniques to modulate the complex transcriptional network, which will eventually govern the tissue new organogenesis. So learning from last 40, 50 years of mistakes in the field of tissue engineering, what we should do now, we should rather use that knowledge not for engineering constructs for organ replacement, but rather we need to develop in vitro disease models or in vitro models to develop better understanding about developmental biology pathways. So these in vitro models will help greatly on various aspects. For example, now animal models are used as standard practice for checking efficacy and toxicity of new drug molecules, bioactive cosmetic products, and there is significant burden in terms of time spent, money wasted for preclinical in vivo testing, and then there is subsequent delay in clinical translation. Secondly, major part of the research results obtained on animals cannot be directly translated to humans. Next, we can, by using this type of in vitro model systems, we can develop better understanding about all different mechanisms which are regulating cellular functions. We can develop new therapeutic strategies, or we can validate those new therapeutic strategies for large varieties of clinical needs. And in future, the clinical strategies are moving more towards personalized medicine. So by using this type of in vitro model, we can develop patient-specific drug screening strategies to predict which drug will be most suitable for which patient population. In this slide, I try to summarize various methods by which we can prepare simple cellular structure. It can be, we can culture cells on some non-adherent surface. For example, we can coat a tissue culture plate with agarose gel or polyhema, and then cells will start to form aggregates automatically. Or we can encapsulate within some hydrogel, for example, alginate bead. We can develop 3D aggregates by using hanging drop method, or by using rotating wall vessel bioreactor, we can create zero gravity situation where all the cells will start to form aggregate. Or we can culture them over either 3D porous scaffolds, or various companies, commercial companies are developing a lot of artificial synthetic matrix, Matrigel, Extracell, Algae Matrix, HiF11. There is a long list. I just mentioned these 3-4 examples that how we can develop different engineered organs or organoids. In textile technology department, we have access to various textile engineering strategies. We can develop non-woven fabric, electrospun scaffold, woven fabric, knitted fabric to control orientation of filaments, as well as we can play with large varieties of mechanical properties of those textile constructs. And then generally we seed cells on top of those textile scaffolds. But gradually we are moving towards a more complicated, more advanced system. So we are mostly using 3D bioprinting, where we are specifically trying to deposit cells, extracellular matrix, artificial bioink, growth factors, or cytokines to replicate very complicated anatomical architecture. In this presentation, I would like to give you a few examples of what we have done so far and what type of disease models we have tried to develop. And then by using those in vitro disease models, we tried to generate better understanding about different pathological conditions. For example, first we tried to develop 3D in vitro tumor model system. And we all know three-dimensional structure of tumor plays very important role in tumor development. Growth in 3D architecture has shown that it can promote resistance of cancer towards various treatment strategies using drugs, cytokines, or irradiation. Professor Rolf M. Zinkernagel got Nobel Prize in 1996 in physiology or medicine, and his group published a very interesting finding. When they injected single cancer cells in mouse, it could not lead to life-threatening cancer. But when they implanted small tumor fragment, that led to neoplastic diseases. So definitely this particular paper showed that three-dimensional tumor structure plays very important role in cancer development. So in my PhD thesis, I tried to develop three-dimensional melanoma tumor model, and we used large varieties of melanoma cancer cells. For example, we used NA8 cells which do not express melanoma differentiation or tumor-associated antigens. We used HBL, D10, and many other cell lines which express typical melanoma-associated differentiation antigens. And these are all derived from metastatic melanoma, and they are HLA-A2 positive. When we cultured these cells in monolayer condition or as three-dimensional spheroid, there is significant difference in their proliferation capacity, as seen by the Alamar blue cell proliferation assays. When I tried to stain by BRDU, we observed that cells located in the center of these multicellular spheroids are mostly in quiescent state, but all the cells which are in outer layer or in the periphery, they are actively cycling. And after 10 to 15 days, then the cells which are present in inner core started to undergo apoptosis, and we could develop a necrotic core which is very similar to the structure of three-dimensional solid tumor. There are a large number of publications available on how melanoma tumor progresses. Generally, from clinician's perspective, when melanoma is still in radial growth phase, that is connected to better prognosis, because in that stage, cells are still separated from each other and they are mostly growing in 2 dimension. But then when melanoma progresses to vertical growth phase, then it assumes 3D architecture, then it becomes very difficult to treat. And large number of papers have been published that which genes are upregulated in which stage and how that is causing drug resistance, immune resistance, or how it will control metastatic process. So we wanted to generate that understanding by using our very simple in vitro tumor model system. So first question I wanted to ask, what is the effect of 3D tumor architecture on modulation of gene expression profile? To answer that question, I cultured melanoma cells in monolayer on Petri dish, or we first coated the Petri dish with collagen, then cultured cells in 2D, or we first prepared 3D aggregate by culturing cells in polyhema coated U bottom plate, and then we tried to extract total RNA. Then we used Affymetrix gene array to check difference in their gene expression pattern in 2D or 2D over collagen coated surface or in 3D. The result was quite dramatic that when we cultured melanoma cells in 3D spheroid, the gene expression pattern got drastically modified compared to 2D. And there are many genes which are known to play very important role in melanoma progression were upregulated or downregulated in our 3D culture condition. For example, there are genes encoding different chemokines, for example, IL-8, or factors which are responsible for angiogenesis, for example, angiopoietin light 4, hypoxia inducible protein 2, VEGF1, VEGF2 were highly upregulated in 3D spheroids. So that gave some indication that probably that this 3D culture condition is showing some similarity with the observations made in clinical tumor specimens. We tried to understand role of different factors and how this 3D structure formation will modulate that gene expression pattern. And we could identify that probably due to inherent homotypic cell-to-cell interaction or specific microenvironmental condition. For example, hypoxia may play a very important role, which can determine specific gene expression pattern, and how that will be relevant to in vivo solid tumors which are growing in patient's body. Next question we wanted to ask, if we culture tumor-associated antigen-specific cytotoxic T lymphocytes, whether there will be any difference in lack of immune recognition process. Because as I mentioned earlier, that radial growth phase of melanoma is associated to better prognosis. But when melanoma assumes 3D structure, then probably there is a lack of immune recognition in patient's condition. To address that, I first tried to culture cells in 3D spheroid. This red is the in vitro tumor model. And then I added CTL clones, cytotoxic T lymphocyte clones, which are highlighted by CFSE green fluorescence. And we could observe a very interesting behavior that these T cells could infiltrate only in the periphery of the tumor, but they could not infiltrate in the inside part of the in vitro tumor spheroid. And that showed very similar findings with the tumor biopsies we collected from the patients. Here in this picture, you can see that a large tumor, melanoma tumor, is growing, and all the small dots, which are T cells, which are standing in the periphery, but they could not infiltrate inside or could not kill the cancer cell or tumor. Since last 25-30 years, a large number of tumor-associated antigens has been identified. And that has raised hopes or expectation for better treatment for large varieties of neoplastic diseases by active antigen-specific immune therapy or by vaccination. But only a very minority of patients show evidence of successful immunization. And also their clinical responses are still very debatable. Here we first tried to understand how 3D structure development by a solid tumor can cause lack of immune recognition. So we used melanoma tumor-associated antigen-specific cells, and we selected the CTL clones which are specific for those antigens. And then we tried to find the recognition process. So to the students, generally cancer cells express those antigen, and these are presented by the HLA-A2 molecules. And then if there is interferon gamma production, these T cells can identify those cancer cells, and they can produce interferon gamma to kill the cancer cell. So we can use this interferon gamma production as a marker of antigen recognition process. Next, I tried to culture cells, melanoma cells isolated from patients in either 2D or 3D. And we cultured Melan A or MART antigen specific CTL clones upon stimulation with HBL cells cultured in 2D and 3D. And then we observed that definitely the cells in 2D are producing more amount of interferon gamma compared to the cells in 3D. We varied that experiment with various patient cells, and in every case, in different ratios, we observed more production of interferon gamma in 2D culture compared to 3D. So that is definitely showing there is a lack of immune recognition process if cancer cells are growing in 2D or 3D. Further, as I mentioned earlier, that the NA8 cells do not express MART antigen or MART gene. So we studied gene expression pattern by RT-PCR. We first cultured cells in both 2D and 3D. And by RT-PCR, we are again confirming that when cells are growing in 2D, they express huge amount of MART gene. But as we grow them in 3D, MART gene expression is reduced. That is even again validated by flow cytometric analysis. Then I did one experiment where I first cultured them in 3D, and then I disrupted those 3D aggregates, and again I put them back in two-dimensional culture.
Dr. Ghosh, yeah, sorry, there's a small request from that if you could use a pointer from Dr. Abhijit that he's saying that it'll be easier to follow the
Okay,
system.
okay.
And
Okay.
also if you could maybe if you could like finish in 10 minutes, because we are like kind of constrained in terms of time. But, yeah, thank you.
Okay, I'll try to finish. So we cultured cells in 3D, and then we disrupted the spheroid and tried to culture in 2D, so that the cells, or to see whether the cells can again start expressing the MART antigen. And indeed, we observed that cells in two-dimensional culture can recover, and the tissue tumor associated antigen expression is often matching with the antigen present in different other biopsies in different patients. Not only antigen, but also the HLA-A2 expression was downregulated as observed by specific monoclonal antibody staining in compared to their counterparts cultured in 2D. And importantly, this effect was not allele specific, but concerned all HLA class 1 gene products as indicated by staining with monoclonal antibodies specific for a monomorphic determinant of HLA class 1 heavy chain. We also checked expression of fast ligand perforin granzyme B in TA specific affected cells. And in each case, there was lack of expression of these strategies. And that is showing why our immune cells cannot recognize and kill cancer cells growing in 3D. So as a part of this study, we could conclude that when we grow cancer cells in 3D, there is down regulation in expression of antigen and HLA, and that will cause profound impact on recognition process by antigen specific T cells. And we tried to find multiple mechanisms how our immune recognition process can be modulated. Now, I would like to give you another example that there was a PhD student in my lab, Shumit Murab, who is now a postdoc in USA. He had tried to develop macular corneal dystrophy model. So macular corneal dystrophy is a very common classical form of inherited corneal dystrophy, which is affecting the stroma. And gradually the cornea becomes hazy and cloudy. And that happens because of mutation in the gene carbohydrate sulfotransferase 6. And that produces inactive form of enzyme, which is responsible for sulfation of keratan sulfate molecules. So Shumit used sodium chlorate to replicate that process, which is a competitive inhibitor of phosphoadenosine phosphosulfate. So that is the enzyme responsible for inhibiting or modulating the proteoglycan. And then Shumit actually observed that there are a lot of abnormal aggregates of keratan sulfate deposited over those cells. And finally, Shumit tried to validate all detailed mechanism of gene expression pattern and further validated by immunohistochemical studies. And as a take-home message or summary of this particular project, we could identify that the inhibition of sulfation of keratan sulfate will result into downregulation of Wnt signaling pathway that will lead to downregulation of two protein groups. Firstly, cadherin and integrins, which will help in cell-to-cell matrix interaction. And in absence of those proteins, the epithelial membrane as well as the descent membranes get disrupted. Second group is all the MMPs. In absence of MMPs, all the abnormally sulfated keratan sulfate or thick collagen bundles could not be degraded. So then there will be a lot of accumulation of those abnormal proteins in the stroma, and that will lead to loss of transparency of cornea. And that study got published in the cover page journal of laboratory investigation. Further, a lot of projects in our group are focused on replicating cartilage degeneration condition. And we know that there is still a lack of understanding whether there is altered genetic signature of chondrocytes due to abnormal or traumatic mechanical loading. And that will be followed by chronic inflammation, or whether there is some kind of genetic predisposition, and the chondrocytes will react secondarily to the fibrillated and modified extracellular matrix, which is associated to aging process. And even if you apply normal loading, the cartilage will get degraded. In order to find that mechanism, Sumit again tried to develop in vitro model of osteoarthritis, and he tried to replicate the formation of ternary complex among the growth factor, its high affinity receptor, and the proteoglycan heparan sulfate, which happens in osteoarthritis. So we attached covalently TNF alpha, IL-1 beta with silk, and we cultured chondrocytes, and then we checked the gene expression pattern as well as the morphological changes. So we observed a very interesting phenomenon that when we cultured cells over cytokine conjugated film, cells started to express elongated structures.
One second, sorry, Dr. Ghosh. Just a small request to all participants if they could mute their mics. Thank you.
These type of features are very commonly present in biopsies collected from osteoarthritic cartilage tissue, and cells express intermediate filament vimentin. So in vitro condition, also in presence of those cytokines, chondrocytes are showing similar type of behavior. Then Sumit tried to replicate the DNA microarray study, and we compared osteoarthritic cartilage biopsies we collected from hospitals, and we compared gene expression pattern of in vitro condition, and we observed there is a dramatic similarity in gene expression pattern that gave us some confirmation that this is a reasonable starting point to develop a disease model of osteoarthritis. Now I am coming towards the end of my presentation, but this is very interesting because since last 100 years people are trying to develop artificial skin. In 1981, there was a paper published in Science where the first tissue engineered skin was published. But if you look at the cross section of human skin, there is a very specific undulated morphology is present. But if you look at all the engineered skins developed by all scientists around the world, that specific undulated morphology between dermis and epidermis are still missing. So we got a project from ITC Bangalore, and where their scientists tried to, asked to develop that type of undulated morphology by 3D bioprinting, because it is very important to replicate those undulated morphologies for replicating the biological functionality and mechanical properties of skin. And the adherence between the dermis and epidermal layers are actually governed by those undulated morphologies. In different disease conditions, those morphologies may get modulated. So there was a postdoc, Dr. Prasad Admane, who tried to develop a model by 3D bioprinting to replicate that undulated morphology, and we tried to print fibroblast, keratinocytes, melanocytes by 3D bioprinting, and we checked long-term cell viability as well as the morphological changes in the cells. And further, there was another postdoc, Dr. Abhishek, who tried to collect skin from Safdarjung Hospital, and he was interested in comparing expression of different differentiation markers, for example, cytokeratin 1 in our 3D bioprinted skin along with the healthy human skin. And we got a lot of similarity in those expressions. Finally, we tried to conduct high throughput whole transcriptome sequencing by using next generation sequencing platform Illumina HiSeq 2000. And further, we validated that data by using the protein profiling using Orbitrap. And we could identify that there was involvement of number of pathways which are related to skin development and physiology. For example, all the extracellular matrix organization, keratinization, cornification, collagen fibril organization. So these pathways are very similar between our bioprinted in vitro human skin model with the real human skin. Somebody is drawing some pictures. So further, after developing this healthy human skin, we tried to develop skin scar model, and we tried to first publish one paper where we cultured fibroblast cells in collagen, and then we tried to replicate features of hypertrophic scar And we observed in presence of TGF-beta1, IL-6, IL-8, how fibroblasts differentiated to myofibroblasts and how they could replicate at least some features of scar tissue formation. For example, there was strong expression of alpha smooth muscle actin stress fibers. There was severe contraction. There was excessive collagen and fibronectin secretion. There was upregulation in expression of fibrotic extracellular matrix proteins Spark and tenascin. There was low MMP secretion. So finally, we tried to understand that if we can now translate that to develop 3D bioprinted skin scar model, how different cellular signaling processes will modulate. And we observed that there is involvement of TGF-beta SMAD signaling pathway and Wnt beta-catenin cellular signaling pathway that will play a very important role in establishing in vitro dermal scar model. And finally, the student Shikha Chawla, who was developing this in vitro scar model, she got an award from Rohoto Pharma, Japan, and she went to Japan for participating in a business innovation contest. And in various news media, this work was highlighted. But most importantly, we started a startup company, Regen Artists Private Limited, where we are trying to develop this type of in vitro skin disease conditions. So this is the last slide and the take-home message from my talk, that even after 40 years of very sincere, hard-working research in the field of tissue engineering, our understanding about the underlying molecular dynamics for organogenesis or organ repair is still very limited. We mostly culture cells over 3D porous scaffolds, and that results in non-homogeneous architectural features. And eventually we fail to replicate anatomical complexity. There is huge patient-to-patient variation, and we still don't have optimized protocol for cellular differentiation. But we believe that if we now combine 3D bioprinting along with different cells, different soluble factors, we will be able to replicate spatial and temporal arrangement of cells and extracellular matrix. We can study different morphogenetic signaling pathways, and in future we can develop patient-specific tissues which will be able to, which will help us to minimize the need for unnecessary killing and torture of animals in lab. And that is the main focus of our startup company, Regen Artists Private Limited. I would like to thank all the funding agencies, particularly DST has provided funding to establish collaboration with a lot of international groups. DBT had provided generous support for our 3D bioprinting activities. And we got a project from ITC Bangalore for developing 3D bioprinted skin. Thank you so much for your kind attention. And I'll be happy to answer any question at the end of this presentation.
Thank you, Dr. Ghosh, for the very interesting presentation, especially the in vitro scar model. So as Dr. Ghosh has requested, we'll actually take all the questions for both this session and the next session at the end of both the talks. So please type in whatever questions you may have in the chat box and we'll take those at the end. So now we'll move on to our next speaker, and Sham, if you could please.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Ghosh, for the interesting presentation. So we move on to the next session. It's by Dr. Kaushik Chatterjee, faculty at Biomaterial and Tissue Engineering Lab at IISc Bangalore. So his research is broadly divided into scaffolds for tissue engineering, where fabricated 3D scaffolds from novel biodegradable polymers and nano composites incorporating different various types of nanomaterials to promote tissue generation in scaffolds. They also engineer organotypic tissue models, and the other aspect which they work on is TI alloys for medicinal plants. So having said this, I would like to now invite Dr. Kaushik Chatterjee to present his work on engineering 3D tissue models for breast cancer. Dr. Chatterjee, over to you. And another thing for the participants, So if there are any questions for both Dr. Chatterjee and Dr. Ghosh, please type them in the chat box so that we can take them at the end of the session. Thank you all.
Okay.
Dr. Chatterjee, over to you.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. I hope you can hear me and see the slides.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. So thanks to the organizers for the invitation. And it's always good and bad to follow Saurabh, because the bad part is it's difficult to match the kind of work they do. The good part is he explains things nicely, so I can skip over a lot of the introduction. So I will sort of focus on one part of what we've been doing over the years, is to develop models for breast cancer. And as you just heard, in our lab, we work on a variety of materials, and these are for a fairly wide spectrum of applications, starting from these conventional medical devices, in particular for orthopedic implants. And also we do a lot of tissue engineering. And as Saurabh very nicely explained, over the years, people have been looking to develop these strategies where you can take a 3D porous structure, put cells on them, seed cells, and you can put it back in the human body to be able to regenerate a particular tissue. That aside, the other sort of application that's emerged out of this is to be able to develop what people call organotypic models. And he's also explained this quite nicely, but I'll sort of summarize it in this slide, that if you look at cells inside the human body, they maintain their form and functions, cell and cell matrix interactions. And when you put them on a petri dish, the cells, which is what typically biology labs would do, the cells will flatten out and these interactions are largely lost. And again, the conventional biology approach to try and bridge this gap is to use animal models, but they of course have various limitations, starting from ethics issues to the cost, the time required, and most importantly, human physiology is not the same as animal physiology. And that overall has motivated the field of trying to develop these models, lab bench models that would be better mimics of human organs and tissues. And the idea is that if you could do that, can you at least recapitulate some of these cell and cell matrix interactions, so that you can use these for studying the molecular basis of diseases, screen for drugs, and so on. In our lab, we've been working on breast cancer for several years, primarily the work of a former PhD student, Gauri Balachandar, and she worked jointly with a collaborator and a colleague of mine in the institute, Professor Anu Rangarajan. She runs a lab which focuses on breast cancer biology. And as a biomaterials lab, we sort of jointly worked on this project, and Gauri worked with a couple of other undergraduate students, Vishwadeep and Kavalya, to work on this. And I don't need to emphasize why breast cancer is such an important disease, given that it's one of the most common forms of cancer, and also one of the most common forms or causes of cancer-related deaths. So when you talk about cancer, thanks to all the medical advancements that have happened, if the cancer is sort of localized to, especially breast cancer is localized to the primary site, your prognosis is pretty good because it can be surgically removed, or you could do radiotherapy and so on. The challenge becomes still, you're in a medical setting, the challenge is when the cells start to migrate out into other organs and they undergo what is known as metastasis. And here there are two important molecular events that are important. Number one is this event of EMT, or epithelial to mesenchymal transition, where the cells at the primary site undergo EMT and they start to migrate into secondary organs. When they reach the secondary organs, not all cells have the capacity to form a secondary tumor. There's a subset of population in that tumor which would give rise to these secondary tumors, and these have what are known as the stem-like property, or these are the cancer stem cells. So it becomes important to look at EMT and cancer stemness as sort of important hallmarks of to study cancer metastasis, right? So what we did was to take a biodegradable, biocompatible polymer, which is polycaprolactone. Polycaprolactone is used quite a bit in tissue engineering, but the other major use actually is to make these biodegradable sutures and meshes and so on. So basically it's a plastic. In everyday terminology, we would call it a plastic, but it's a thermoplastic where you just dissolve it in an organic solvent, but it won't dissolve it in, you cannot dissolve that in water. And you mix it with, say, sodium chloride, and then which sodium chloride won't dissolve in that organic solvent. So now if you take that mixture and you you let the solvent evaporate, what you're left behind is a solid mass of polymer and salt. If you put that in water, the salt will dissolve, and what you're left behind is a porous structure. And this is a well-established technique of making these kind of porous structures in the biomaterials world. And we've been doing this, and this is how it would look in an SEM, where this is about 200 to 400 microns in diameter. And the important point here is, the Petri dish, the polystyrene dishes are actually very hard. And even the polymer by itself that we're using is quite stiff. But if you make it into a porous structure, now you've got a mechanical sort of environment which mimics that of human tumors. And so you can then think of this sort of as a soft compliant substrate on which the cells can grow. So what we did then was to add these breast tumor cells. These are invasive in nature. These are 231 cells which were added on these scaffolds and also on the TC plates. And if you notice here that after, they become 70 to 80% confluent, even though there are, a lot of cells and nearly sort of extending one on top of another, what you realize is that these, you can track, sort of track individual cells. Whereas if you look at the cells grown in the scaffold, what you would find is, and this is, we're looking into one particular pore in here, you can't make out individual cells anymore, and which indicates that there's more interaction between them. And you wait for, say, another, 7 days. So at the end of 14 days, you have little tumor masses that are starting to form in these scaffolds. So we asked the question, what's different between cells in the scaffold versus the standard, 80% confluent dish, which is what people use. So again, we did a lot of molecular characterization, and in the interest of time, I'll just summarize it for you. Is basically we found that the cells in 3D have higher EMT markers, which implies that they have a higher tendency to invade. The other thing we also did is to look at what are the stemness properties, and we found that the cells that are grown in the 3D scaffolds have increased cancer stem-like properties. So this is through molecular signatures and some functional assays. So what we are essentially saying is that if you put the cancer cells in scaffolds, they will become more aggressive and essentially have a higher tendency to metastasize. So to check that, what we did is to grow the cells in the scaffold for 7 days and separately take the cells in 2D at 80% confluency. We trypsinized, got equal number of cells out, and we injected them in breast tumors of immunocompromised female mice. And we allowed these tumors to grow for 60 days. The animals were sacrificed. What you find is the scaffold-derived tumor is actually much larger than the plate-derived tumor. So this is your 3D on the right and the 2D on the left. It's not only just larger, also if you look at the histology of it, there are differences. So the bulk of the tumor is essentially the same. There are no major differences. However, if you look at the edge between the tumor and the host tissue, you see a very clear edge here for the 2D tumor, versus in 3D, you can see there's no clear demarcation, and the tumor cells are actually migrating or invading into the surrounding tissue. And also, if you take out the lungs of these animals, you find that when you have a scaffold-derived tumor, you get many more secondary lesions, supporting the idea that cells from 3D are much more metastatic, right? So to summarize this bit, basically what we were observing is that when you put cells in 3D, they will have higher metastatic potential, and they show all these hallmarks of increased sort of metastatic activity. So even though 2D and 3D were different, what was not clear or not proven in this study is whether 3D is closer to humans or not. So the next thing what we did here was to again grow the cells in 2D and 3D for 7 days in the scaffold. And then we collected the RNA. We sent it for next-gen sequencing to look particularly for these non-coding microRNA. And that's because there are very distinct signatures that are well known in the cancer literature that are associated with higher tumorigenic activity. We did see quite a few differences. And when we looked at specific, miRNA that were differentially expressed, what we noticed is that the particular miRNA, say if you look at the first one, which was downregulated in the 3D compared to the 2D, had also been implicated in other studies where they noticed that this was downregulated in high-grade glioblastoma. Something else like this towards the bottom, if you see it's threefold higher in the scaffold, is also increased in some other prostate cancer study, right? So this was again saying that, yes, we were sort of following a similar pattern, but we also did sort of a global comparison, which is basically looked at the profiles of cells grown in 2D, the cells grown in 3D, and a tumor made out of cells in 2D, which is what a typical cancer biology lab would do. So the 2D and the TD here, which is the tumor derived, are the two sort of the gold standards in biology, and 3D was our sample. And then we looked at the profiles with those of human tissues. These are available on the Cancer Atlas, and that's sort of a global database. So we compared these profiles, and if you notice here, the way to read this is if you take a particular human sample here, another one here, you can see the correlation is close to 1, which means they're very well correlated. If you look at the 2D with any of the human samples, you notice the correlation is close to about 0.4 to 0.5. There's poor correlation, not surprising. If you look at, you know, the tumor derived or the tumor that had been formed in the mouse, then here the correlation is close to 0.8. And if you look at the 3D, the correlation's about 0.6 to 0.7. And this is summarized here. So if you put the human tumors at 1, you can see that the 2D is poorly correlated. The animal tumor, which is made of the same cells, has a high correlation, but this takes about 45 to 60 days. And this is after 7 days in culture, we can start to see quite good correlation. And this could be refined further for better sort of mimic of the human tumors. Anu's lab had been getting these human tumors from the local hospital in Bangalore, where we were able to isolate the cells. And what we tried to do was to put these cells in our scaffolds to see if we could grow little tumor masses there. And we noticed that some of the cells did survive, but they never were really happy in terms of forming a little tumoroid. So what we did was to modify the scaffold. And here the idea was that you take this porous polymer scaffold, you grow the cancer-associated fibroblasts, which are known to secrete ECM proteins. We grew them first. Yes. Hello. Yeah. So we grew these fibroblasts on these scaffolds, and we allowed them to secrete their ECM for 7 days. Then we added, these mild detergents to decellularize these scaffolds so that the ECM is left behind. And then when we added these cells, what we found is over time, maybe about a week to 10 days, they would organize into these nice little organoids. And we could actually take these, just as proof of principle, take cells from different patients, and we tried with 2 different drugs and a few different concentrations. And there were, certainly differences in how these patient samples were responding to the drugs. And to prove that, or to sort of propose the idea that, yes, one could think of these as sort of platforms to look at personalized, drug regimens that can be prescribed by, taking a biopsy of this tumor. You could grow it on a scaffold, screen for drugs, and then maybe identify the most potent drugs to treat particular patients. Okay. So aside from, of course, the cancer epithelial cells, which are the primary ones involved in cancer progression and metastasis and so on, the other stromal cells also play an important role. One particular population are these cancer-associated fibroblasts, and they're involved in a lot of things from secreting ECM to angiogenesis, inflammation, and so on. But what's well known is if you take cancer-associated fibroblasts and you continue to sort of culture and passage them in, say, a petri dish, very quickly they lose their tumorigenic activity or all the hallmarks of being a cancer-associated fibroblast. So what we tried to do was to develop a platform so that you could maintain that. And for that, we used, again, polycaprolactone, but we didn't want to make a foam. We made a fibrous mat by a process known as electrospinning. So this is basically the polymer solution that you take in a syringe. You apply a high voltage here. And this is, again, a well-established technique where you collect a fibrous mat. And here, these are, these fibers are typically in the hundreds of nanometers to a few micron range. And the reason people are so interested in this is because it starts to mimic the architecture of decellularized tissue. So what we did then is we took these cancer-associated fibroblasts, and in our collaborators' lab They already had a well-established technique to identify these populations from the patient tumors that we were getting. We took these cells and we put them on the TC plate, which is 2D, and on the fibrous mat. What we noticed is that the cells on the 2D were locally aligned, but not globally aligned across the plate. Interestingly, the ones on the fiber mat were globally aligned. And this is an important observation because there are studies which say that when the fibroblasts in tumors get aligned, it's a hallmark of a more aggressive tumor. And because these sort of aligned fibroblasts will lay down fibers that can then aid in invasion. So then we did more characterization. We noticed that the cells grown in 2D versus on the fibrous mat, there were differences in the sort of the signatures of the cancer-associated fibroblasts, like alpha smooth muscle actin and ECM proteins like fibronectin. So there was more of these markers in 3D, but not so much in 2D. And also, if you take the media of the cells grown in 2D versus in 3D, and then you put it on cancer epithelial cells like MCF7, what we find is when you take the conditioned media from 3D, it helped the cells grow better, and they also expressed more of the EMT markers or stemness markers when we took the conditioned media from 3D compared to when the conditioned media was taken from 2D. So basically what we are saying is that by putting the cancer-associated fibroblasts on the fiber mats, you are getting a more tumorigenic phenotype of the fibroblasts on the fiber mat, right? And one last thing that we looked at with the fibroblasts was cancer inflammation, and this has been known to be mediated by the NF-kappa B pathway. So what we did was to stain for P65, which is one of the subunits of NF-kappa B, and again, the CAFs in 3D expressed more P65, and also there was higher expression of downstream proteins when the cells were grown on the fiber mats compared to those which were grown in 2D. And finally, to check whether all of this holds in a in vivo setting, what we did was to take MDA MB231 cells, which are the cancer epithelial cells that had been cultured in 2D. And then we took the CAFs, again, at a much lower ratio here, but the CAFs were either in 3D or in 2D. Now here what happened is after 45 days, in terms of the tumor sizes, there weren't very significant differences. They were more or less similar, or at least there were no statistical difference, but there were differences in the histology. So the main observation here was that if you have the CAFs from the 2D culture, the tumor is less invasive. So it was basically localized within the mammary fat pad. However, when we had the CAFs from 3D, the tumor became much more invasive. It went into the muscle, the subdermal fat, and nearly towards the dermis. So you can see that the tumor has gone all the way into the muscle and subdermal fat and so on. And when we took these slides and we showed it to pathologists who had been blinded to the study, they noted that there were more inflammatory cells when there were or immune cells, which was confirmation of increased cancer inflammation when we had 3D CAFs compared to 2D CAFs. So basically, the summary of this is that you can make, say, fibrous mats, you can put cancer-associated fibroblasts on them, and you get sort of a more tumorigenic activity when you use a platform like this compared to a conventional 2D petri dish, which is what has been used over the years. In the interest of time, I won't get into this, but we've also been doing other sort of models. One of them is for cardiomyocytes, and this is the work of another former PhD student, Aditi Jain, with another collaborator of mine, Dr. Ravi Sundaresan. And there they have some protocols to grow these primary fibroblasts. If you notice this video carefully, you can see the cells are beating because these cells have been isolated from newborn mice or rat pups. But the problem is they are not aligned the way you would see them aligned in the heart. So what Aditi did was to develop certain aligned platforms on silicon wafers. And when you do that, you get better alignment. And she could also use these platforms to study cardiac hypertrophy Again, I'm not getting into the details. You can look up the papers if you're interested. And similarly, she also had another sort of a platform, this time an Align Nanofibrous platform to grow primary muscle cells. And you can see here, so I'll just play this video so that you can see these primary muscle cells that are twitching, which is what they can isolate from these mice. But the sort of the downside here is that the cells are not aligned the way they would in the muscle. By having these aligned nanofibers and putting the cells, she was able to align these cells on these mats, and that became sort of a better platform to study degeneration of skeletal muscle, and also potentially to test drugs for these kind of diseases. So I will end here by basically sort of emphasizing here that one can engineer platforms, and also, like Saurabh mentioned, we are looking at other techniques like 3D bioprinting. Something that neither of us here is talking about is the microfluidics technology that could be integrated with these patterned substrates or 3D models to maybe provide a more comprehensive or a holistic view of what actually happens in the tissue. And all this put together could really get you what would be a truly organotypic model. Before I end, I must thank all the people over the years who've been actually doing the work, including the former students, the current students, and also a lot of collaborators. In particular, for the work I presented today, we worked with Anu for cancer and Ravi for all the muscle work. And of course, all these funding agencies without whom all of this would not have been possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Kaushik, for this very interesting talk. So maybe now we can just take a few questions for both Dr. Kaushik and Dr. Ghosh. So I'll just maybe read out the questions so that it's audible for everyone, and we can answer the questions. The first question is for Dr. Ghosh, where someone has asked, how do you select the polymer material for 3D bioprinting? Do you engineer the biomaterial, or do you use classical biopolymers like fibrin or collagen?
Very relevant question. So as many groups around the world started to use either collagen, gelatin or fibrin, gradually people started to culture cells on alginate, chitin, chitosan, and there are many other materials. And mostly people focused how easily cells can form attachment and how easily cells can proliferate. But the most important information, I think, is how those biomaterials can modulate cellular signaling pathways. Because now we have matured enough to develop very complicated tissues or organs for which we need to have that specific information. For example, we have published many papers that silk fibroin protein can upregulate expression of Wnt beta-catenin signaling pathway, or hedgehog and parathyroid hormone signaling pathway. So people around the world, there are probably 50-60 groups who are working on silk-based biomaterials for tissue engineering, but they are trying to use silk for all sorts of organ. But for me, it makes sense if we know in which organ development Wnt beta-catenin signaling pathway is upregulated. We should use silk as a biomaterial only for those tissue regeneration pathway, not for other organs where Wnt beta-catenin pathway may not play very important role.
Right. So biomaterial depend upon what kind of process you're trying to investigate. Right. So the second question is asked by Tejas, where he's asking, what is the size of the tissue model that is engineered by this method?
So there is no such limitation, because if we use any textile based scaffolds, we can prepare as large as possible. But the real challenge is how uniformly we can distribute cells over large size scaffolds. By 3D bioprinting, in the typical bioprinter we are using, we have a limitation that we can print only 4 centimeter by 4 centimeter constructs. So, but that is the limitation of that particular bioprinter which we are using. If we use any other bioprinter which will allow us to print larger tissue, we can print that.
Right. But the larger tissues, if I'm not wrong, do they come with the limitation of like the circulation and for the interior cells?
The main advantage of 3D bioprinting is we can tailor-made the overall architecture. We can control
Right.
the porosity, pore interconnectivity in a very specific
Right.
manner.
Right. 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 But then the additional challenges of access to nutrients and everything, those things come in for larger structure.
Correct.
So the next question is for Dr. Kaushik, where Dr. Abhijit is asking, if I harvest cells from 3D culture, but then culture them on 2D Petri plates, how long the stem-like properties or metastatic activities will be maintained? In other words, do they have memory of their previous microenvironment?
Right, actually, it's a good question. And well, the last part, the answer is yes, they do have some memory. Now it's never, digital of on and off. So it'll fade over time. And also it'll depend on the cell and the substrate. I mean, from where you're transferring and perhaps how long you had kept it to begin with in 3D. And then, to what you transferred in 2D. And then, what we find is, I won't go back to the slides, but you can have a look at the paper. So for the breast cancer epithelial cells, when we took them out from the 3D porous scaffolds and we put them on the Petri dish, what we found is that their morphology is a little different, which had hallmarks of sort of a more migratory kind of a cell. And also in a separate study, which is ongoing, I have not shared the data here, but we've taken HeLa cells that had been grown in a similar scaffold, and we, put them back on a plate or a glass cover slip because we wanted to do sort of AFM studies of the mechanical properties of those cells. And what we see is the cells that had been grown right from the beginning in 2D versus the ones that had been taken out from 3D have different biophysical properties of the cells, and their phenotype and other things are different. And the last evidence of that memory is that the fact that when we take these cells and put them in these mice that I showed these studies for, there we are not putting the scaffold in there. So all we've done is grown the cells for 7 days, and also we got an 80% confluent dish for 2D. We isolate the cells and we inject them. So that way there is no scaffold, but the fact that they've come from sort of a different platform to begin with, they seem to have, even 60 days later, the tumor that forms seems to have been, behave quite differently. So there is memory, but it varies.
Right. There's also a follow-up question to that, where he's asking, have you compared a 3D tumoroids grown scaffold versus 3D tumoroids formed without scaffold using simple hanging drop method?
No. So the simple answer is no, we haven't. And we've been asked this question, and well, the challenge is each one of them is quite intensive. I don't think the PhD student would have liked to, extend her PhD any longer. But yeah, I think the way, our take on this has been that, there are many 3D models, and in fact, not just hanging drop, even if we change our biomaterial, or, if you take, say, nanofibers versus you take a hydrogel, you take, say, silk versus you take these thermoplastics, there will be some differences always. So we said, okay, well, what is it that a conventional biology lab would do for their breast cancer study, which is to grow them on a Petri dish and to inject them in an animal to form a tumor. So those two have been sort of our gold standards to compare with, and use our 3D model. So.
Right. So there's another question by Ketaki, where they're asking, is it possible to isolate intact tumoroids from scaffolds by degrading the scaffold?
Not our scaffolds are the ones that I showed today, because it will be difficult to get them out, because I can't think of something you can add to PCL where, that will come apart while, the tissue stays in, or the spheroids stay intact. That is unlikely, but there could be other hydrogel based systems. People are, I think, trying to do that with hydrogels or 3D bioprinted hydrogels, where depending on how the hydrogel is held together, you could add in something that will help the hydrogel to fall apart sort of, and then perhaps you can get the cells out. Now, in the process, would you land up altering some things even to a small extent about the cells and the tumoroid? That has to be studied. I think there will be subtle changes, but maybe you could still get those tumoroids.
Next question is by Sharda for Dr. Ghosh, where they're asking how to control collagen formation during wound healing, as it is important during the initial phase, but may lead to hypertrophic scar during the later stage.
Very important. So we observed that we selected a combination of like TGF-beta and 2 other cytokines, and we played with the concentration of those cytokines. And we also observed that depending upon the mode by which we are delivering, that will also play a very important role. So the dose as well as the delivery modes. So that will play a very important role in controlling the ECM formation. So as initially, first we tried to develop healthy human skin model. Gradually, we tried to convert into scarred model, where our main focus was abnormal production of fibrotic ECM. So that is why we tried to play with not only the growth factor and cytokines, but by the method by which we are covalently conjugating that with the bioink, and how that will modulate the gene expression pattern and protein production.
Just another question for Dr. Ghosh, where they're asking, in your engineered skin model, how do you engineer the interface between the layers, for example, epidermis and dermis, and also was there any vasculature or nerves incorporated?
Okay, so one postdoc, Dr. Prasad Atmani, tried to develop a CAD model by which he first developed the dermis layer, and he developed the CAD model in a manner that epidermis layer will be placed on top, but it will be exactly following the undulated morphology. And then we prepared, we deposited fibroblast cells, and next we tried to deposit keratinocytes and melanocytes to replicate the undulated morphology between dermis and epidermis. And second question, no, we have not yet added endothelial cells or any other immune cells. So we first only printed healthy human skin with fibroblast, keratinocytes, melanocytes, not with other cells.
There's one question for Dr. Kaushik, where they're asking how exactly do you check for drug efficacies using your model?
Right. So we have not done very detailed studies because our focus was mostly to sort of develop these 3D models. Just a few experiments we've done as just simple viability assays of, where there's an untreated control, do the viability assay there, and also, add known doses of drugs, and then look, whether it's MTT or WST, these standard assays. That's what we've done. There are, of course, other things one could do to probe it deeper, which these are things of interest to us, but we have not done that as yet.
Then this, the interest of time, we'll just take one last question. And this way, Dr. Abhijit was asking a general question for both the speakers, where he's asking, how do you see the pharma industries and controller agencies accepting these models in future? Like, what are their opinions on it?
Very good. Maybe I can start with that question. So around 2015, 4 pharmaceutical companies approached me for developing healthy human skin model. And I was really surprised because generally we apply to funding agencies. And in that case, 4 pharmaceutical companies approached me. Then I found that European Union and many other countries have completely banned use of animal models for cosmetic products. So pharmaceutical companies were under tremendous pressure that you have to develop any in vitro model system. And now in 2021, so definitely there are many companies around the world, for example, Episkin, MedTech, and there are many companies who are developing artificial skin. Now, after all this corona pandemic, many companies are developing in vitro model of lungs and various other tissues. So definitely pharmaceutical companies are showing huge interest in using in vitro model system.
Yeah, I would sort of concur, except I think, like he said, because there was a push back from, the regulatory agencies on skin, especially for cosmetics, there's a big sort of a motivation there to develop skin or adapt these engineered skin for testing. But if you say, breast cancer, or if you say something, liver fibrosis or something, so things like that, I think the challenge is, or what I've understood talking to many of these people, is that since it's not a part of the established pipeline that is regulated by, say, FDA or the CDCSO or someone to test it, so they would do it perhaps for their internal motivations to see if they can screen their drug candidates, but they cannot take the data and convince FDA that, look, this is the right drug. So there is still some hesitancy, or I guess that it will become more universally accepted, or there'll be a bigger push to do these things when these regulatory agencies will start to buy into this kind of a model. And so it will come up, I think, more in a bigger way in coming years. But I think the skin is where it's really now sort of taken off, and there are dedicated companies who are just trying to develop these models and sell the model to people who would use it and report that data for qualifying their product for regulatory purposes and so on.
Right. So just a follow-up thing to that. Do you feel like the Indian regulatory bodies are also aware of the new methodologies that are emerging in these areas, and some of the the inhibition could also come from a lack of awareness that these methods are, because many of these methods have developed in the last decade. So do you think there's also a lack of awareness, this thing, which could also be leading to this, and somehow we could start more engagement models between researchers and regulators to also keep them aware of what technology developments are happening, so that they are also more comfortable with making these decisions? So,
I would, someone who believes in this and is in this business, I would vouch for that. We need to make them aware and realize that there is value for this. But yeah, I mean, whether I think it's that bit of a chicken and egg problem where they will sort of buy into it when these models will mature. But for these models to mature, I think there has to be more effort, sustained efforts, and that will happen when there are end users or people who see value in these. So I think so in over time it will happen, but
right. But like you said, for skin, right? I mean, the push came from, like, for example, the global arena, and then obviously the industries also felt the push. So
yes,
I mean, yeah. So if you take that case study, maybe you could say that the initial push from regulatory bodies could increase the pressure for
absolutely
these bodies.
Right. And I think it related to that, I think if there was perhaps some standards developed or something, that because what is it that this model should do, like you have some standards for, say, qualifying a drug candidate through an animal model. If this is a prescribed sort of study you must do, present it to CDCSO, and then only they will consider. So I mean, I think for these models, I have one model, Saurabh has his, everybody's got, I mean, which is the one that you should use, what is the timeline of the study, what kind of data. So I think it's still sort of an emerging field, but once those things start coming up, I think things will move faster.
Right. And also for many of these methodologies, for example, it'll be harder to pick like one method which is going to answer your questions, right? So many of these in vitro methods, probably you may have to use like a combinatorial set of methods where you may, for answering a specific question. So yeah, I think all those things will have to be defined better, like what kind of tests for studying one particular problem and like specific assays. So I think that will have to be developed. So yeah, I think I agree with Dr. Abhijit. I think we should invite the TCGI office to our webinars. So
that's definitely a good idea. We should involve more administrative persons, as well as we should involve politicians.
Right.
Because we only say all abusive words about our politicians, but we should convince them also, as they are also part of the society. And we sometimes it is also a fault of our scientists. Like we talk with so much jargon, common people do not understand. So there should be better open communication with administrative persons as well as decision makers.
Right. Yeah, completely agree. Yeah. So I think we have. I think we'll end there, as I think there are not more questions, but I think the discussions can keep going on. But thank you for both the speakers for such a great and interactive session, and thank you for all those participants who joined us on a Saturday morning for this session. So yeah, so I would just like to end with one small survey that we are also conducting. So I just share my screen. So this is a survey that we are conducting in collaboration with several partners, which includes European Commission and then Technical University of Denmark and a few other partners. So this survey is basically to understand the animal-derived materials and reagents that are used in scientific experiments. And basically the idea is that more attention needs to be given to animal-derived reagents that are being used in terms of their origin, quality, and composition. And one of the ideas which is emerging is that many of the issues with reproducibility, for example, may also stem from the variations or variabilities in animal-derived reagents. So this is a survey to basically get a more deeper understanding regarding that. And I would request all our participants who are involved in any form of in vitro or in vivo research, if they could take the time to fill the survey. So Shyam has posted this survey in the chat box. So this would just take a few minutes of your time, and this would again help to gain a better understanding of the materials and reagents that are used. So just with this small bit, Shyam, do you have any other comments to make?
Nothing much, but I think the discussions went really well, and we had a informative session. Just before we end, if possible, I would request everyone to switch on their videos, just for the sake of we'll just take a photo. So it's not compulsory, but if everyone is comfortable, we can just switch on their videos and then we can take a photo. In the meanwhile, if Dr. Abhijit or Dr. Akbar Shah, if they want to add a few comments, they can go ahead.
So I have a point to make. You hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yeah. I mean, I was listening to the discussion about keep making these methodologies and the products familiar and useful in drug discovery and other applications. I just want to tell you that I am so glad we are making very good progress towards developing many in vitro methods and approaches. But in between making these products and then making them applicable in the drug discovery by the regulatory authorities, you need to have in between a stage called validation. Straight from the labs, we don't take these methods and products for the regulatory community. You'll have to convince them through data, through the dossiers, and most importantly, Surat, your organization should think about validating agency in India, where such nice research, it doesn't stop as research and papers. It should go as product that will be useful for the regulatory community to make them applicable in our furtherance of research and drug discovery. So validation is an important aspect which you and I, perhaps the organization and my organization, should work together to bring up the validation center or agency in India, like the one in Japan or Brazil or the other countries. Okay, very good talk, Kaushik and Ghosh. I'm so happy about the way things are progressing, and thanks, Bharat, for pulling me into the conversation. Thank you so much.
Dr. Akbar Shah for the very valid point. So, yeah, I guess we can conclude, Sham. So,
Yeah,
thanks.
yeah. So we're done. So yeah, thank you all once again for joining us on a Sunday morning for this very informative talk. And also on behalf of CPHMS, I would like to thank Dr. Saurabh Ghosh and Dr. Kaushik Chatterjee for taking their time and interacting with us and our participants. And hope to see you all for the next month's webinar. Thank you all. Yeah.
Thank you, everybody. Bye.
Bye.